How did the world begin? Where is God? What's that smell? What do you mean, officer? Life is full of questions which are sometimes tricky to answer, so we tried to find someone who could help. Krish Kandai is like most of the blokes. He likes Star Wars, football and Mexican food. Unlike most of the blokes, he is also the president of the London School of Theology. We plied him with as much coffee and cake as he could eat and asked him some questions about God, the world and stuff.
Krish, it's really wonderful to have you with us today.
Nice to be here.
And it's great to be able to speak to you because you have an interest in science, and you did a science degree, but then you went on to do a theology degree, which is an interesting combination because there are a lot of people who might say that we don't need God because we have science and that somehow science has disproved God's existence. What do you think?
I'm a big fan of science. I think science is just wonderful. I spent most of my youth either reading or watching scientific television programs or literature. I did all science for A-levels and did a degree in chemistry and medicinal chemistry. And one reason why science is cooler than the other subjects is that I remember my first day as a chemistry student, we were shown this amazing video of all the things that could go wrong in the lab. And it was people setting their hair on fire, it was people having their contact lens melt onto their eyeball, and I walked out of my first chemistry induction day thinking I could die studying my subject, while all the other students, they might die of boredom, but we would die for our subject. So I'm a big fan of science. But I do not think there is any conflict in being passionate about God and believing that God exists and having a friendship with God, and also believing science is fantastic. Maybe a couple of ways that might help us think about this. So I reckon some of our friends watching the video might have enough computer skills to be able to program their computer to put random numbers on a screen. And maybe they could even print them out, maybe a book of random numbers and letters. And I don't know about you, I wouldn't be that interested in reading that, printout of all these random letters. And yet, if, for example, my wife were to type me an email using the same letters, of course, but just this time there's a rational mind ordering them, I would definitely want to read that email. Now, science operates on the assumption that the universe is rational, that it's worth exploring, it's going to fit together, that it isn't random and chaotic, but there is some ordering principle behind it. Otherwise, what's the point of going out to explore it and try to, annotate it and note it and observe it? So science has always operated on that principle that the universe is going to be accessible to our brains and it's going to fit together. And actually, if you look back in history, that mindset that the universe was worth exploring really flourished when Christianity was the dominant culture. And so you go back to the earliest times of the Royal Society, which was one of the first scientific societies in the world. They used to use the expression that we are thinking God's thoughts after him. That somehow by looking at the universe, we're like taking notes on what God has done. And so for me, belief in God gives me a rational basis for assuming that science is going to be successful.
So are you saying that actually some scientists, it was their faith in God which inspired their pursuit of science?
It was, definitely. Particularly in the Western world, that's where science in the the latest phase that we had, it really, really flourished.
One of the big debates, though, is around the beginning of the universe, and there's a lot of talk about the Bible apparently suggesting that the world was created in 6 days by God, and yet the prevalent theory in science is there was a Big Bang and then a process of evolution.
Sure.
What's your view on the debate?
Okay. So within the kind of Christian church, there are two big views about what's going on in those early chapters of Genesis. And some people take quite a literalistic view that it's being, Genesis, particularly chapters 1 and 2, are recording history. Day 1 this happened, day 2 this happened. And so 6 literal days and then a 7th day of rest. Other Christians read the same part of the Bible and they say, you know what, the more you look at it, it does seem to hang together as a beautiful piece of poetry. And it's not trying to explain exactly how God created the universe, because actually some people, like me, are scientifically minded, we're interested in that kind of question, but everybody's interested in why the universe is here. And so it's a poetic device to tell us that everything that exists because God made it. One of my favourite lines in the early chapters of Genesis is it says, and he also made the stars. You know, the billions of galaxies is just a throwaway line. God is so amazing that he can also make billions of galaxies just as kind of an afterthought. I love that. So, you know, there are different views on that. I take the view that I want to trust what the Word of God has to say, and I want to take it on its own terms. And to me, taking it on its own terms, I think it is more of a poetic explanation of why. But some people even would take issue that we would think that God is an irrational thing to suppose in order to come up with a universe. And I remember one night I took my daughter, I think she was 9 at the time, out into the field outside of our house in the middle of the night, and we had sleeping bags and hot mugs of cocoa because we know there was a meteor shower coming. And we waited up and we saw these things flying around. It's just a brilliant daddy and daughter bonding moment. And just imagine as we were waiting for one of those meteors, we started to have a conversation. Daddy, well, why are there stars in the sky? Well, you know, actually, those stars that you're seeing now, that's light that's been travelling for maybe hundreds of thousands of years in order to get to us. No, Daddy, but where did the stars come from? Oh, well, you know, actually, you know, billions of years ago, there was a Big Bang where the whole universe and all the kind of laws that come with it all came into being out of nothing. Okay, Dad, where did those physical laws that started the universe come from? Wow, that's a really good question, daughter. We don't know. They just have always been there, and that's the reason for the universe. So even if you don't factor God into the equation, you've got to explain why there were physical laws that exist in the first place. Now, I'm a Christian, so if my daughter says, Daddy, why are there stars? Okay, there was a Big Bang billions of years ago. Why was that? Well, because there are physical laws that govern the universe. Yeah, but where do those physical laws come from? As a Christian, I say, well, they exist because God created the universe. And then my daughter says, well, Daddy, where did God come from? And I say, well, actually, God has always existed. That's the way the universe has always been set up. Now, some people say, oh, look, you've gone irrational now. You've kind of believe in an eternal God. But actually, compare those two views. Both start somewhere with an assumption. So the one that says physical laws are the explanation for the universe, well, you haven't given me a reason why those physical laws exist. You just have to say they've always been there. So you've made a starting point. And actually Christians have made a starting point too. So to say that we've got an irrational view because we start with God, while people that start with physical laws are more rational, I think is unjustified.
So faith clearly plays a huge role in religion. Do you think faith also plays a role in science?
I think it does. I think, you know, the assumption or the faith belief that the universe is going to be rational to us, it's going to make sense, there is going to be a theory of everything, there is a way to explain why black holes exist, that is a faith step. And science operates on that faith basis, and we're going to go and find out, and we're not going to give up until we found it out. So it's based on, you can't prove that. That's an assumption about the way the universe is. And similarly, I'm taking the faith step that says, based on the evidence I've got, I think that God did create the universe. So faith is an important part of both Christian belief, but actually scientific belief too.
Thank you, Chris.
Okay.